What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back for another album review. It's been almost a week since I've posted an album review, and that was for the latest album from Hate. This time around, there were 3 albums that came out this weekend that I was trying to decide which did I want to cover first. And I thought to myself, well, there's really one logical way to go about picking which one to do first. And that is the big one, the biggest release that came out this past weekend, and that is the latest offering from progressive metal pioneers Dream Theater and their album, A View from the Top of the World. I guess for the 2 people who don't know who Dream Theater are, and you're probably both idiots, brief little history lesson. So Dream Theater originally formed as Majesty back in 1985, with 3 guys from Long Island, New York. John Petrucci on guitar, John Myung on bass, and Mike Portnoy on drums. They all happen to be from Long Island, that were in the Berklee College of Music in Berkeley, Massachusetts. And they jammed together in one of the practice rooms at Berkeley playing Iron Maiden and Rush tunes. But it was through Mike Portnoy's influence how the real heaviness came into the band, because Mike Portnoy was not only into Maiden and Rush and other prog bands of the time, or classic metal like Priest and Sabbath, but was really into the thrash scene at the time, heavily inspired by Metallica and Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, and turned the other guys on into the thrashier stuff. And once they decided to form a band, kind of combining all those influences, a little bit of the thrashiness of a Metallica with the epic quality of Iron Maiden, with the progressive sensibility of bands like Rush and Yes and Pink Floyd, kind of wrapping all those elements together into what would become Dream Theater. And they've been on a roll really ever since they came out in the late 80s with When Day and Dreamy Night. Sure, there have been a couple of missteps here and there, like The Astonishing, even though I have that album in my collection. It's definitely one I have not returned to that often, but Dream Theater is still an amazing band, one of the best in the prog metal scene, and here we are with a new album. Kind of a quick timeline, since it's been only 2 years since the last one came out, but then again, with everything that happened last year, guess you had nothing better to do than to write and record some new material. Now, this time around, while John Petrucci is the producer on this album, the mastering and the mixing would be done by the one and only Andy Sneap, and you can tell that Andy Sneap had his fingerprints all over this album, because this album, I'll go ahead and say, production-wise, this sounds incredible. All the instruments, you can hear them all perfectly mixed together, and it's got a heaviness to it. But before we conclude on that, let's get to the tracks. So we start off with The Alien, which I think was the first single off of this album. Awesome drums and riffs to kick this track off, and then after the intro you get some really thick, chunky riffs and some angular riffing kind of going back and forth before a beautiful guitar solo kicks in. And that is going to be a thing you're going to notice with this album, as they're introducing the song after showcasing some riffs and some keyboards and some drum work. You get a solo to kind of add some melody to the track before the vocals would kick in. And with The Alien, it definitely started that way. After the angular riffing and the chunky riffing kind of going back and forth, that solo kicks in, before we get more heavy riffing as James LaBrie's vocals come in, and the keyboards in the background. And I'll just say right now, throughout the entire album, the keyboards definitely complement the guitars very well on this album, and even complements the bass on certain parts of the album. I'll point those out when we get to that. But with the riffs and the drum work, especially towards the middle of the song, reminded me so much of Opeth, like the way it got a little bit more like mid-tempo to even some doom sections where it slowed down a little bit. But more great guitar melodies over top of the riff as 2 solos follow that part, and these solos were a perfect combination of shredding and feeling. And then towards the end, it gets a little bit faster, and it ends with a beautiful Pink Floyd-esque solo to conclude this awesome opening track. Answering the call, this one you get the 7-string guitars coming in to start this one off, along with the drums going at different time signatures before a quick solo pops up. And the way the riffs and the drums are trading off of one another reminds me of like Periphery and Gojira, like the way the rhythms get a little bit groovy as well as the riff kind of trading off of that groove. The bass and the keyboards complement each other very well throughout this track. And the riffs certainly had more grit to them, and I think that was because of the fact that John decided to use the 7-string on this track. Before we get another solo that was more technical shredding that ends with more melodic flair towards the end. Invisible Monster, beautiful, clean guitars to begin this track, followed by one of the best riffs of the album up to this point. And the way the riffs and rhythm kind of worked in the beginning reminded me a bit of Soen, like from the album Imperial that came out earlier this year, where there were certain tracks where the riffs and the rhythm kind of worked together to create magic, similar to what that album did. So this was the song that kind of reminded me a bit of that Soen album a little bit with how the riffs and the rhythms worked. Tempo picks up a little bit as the guitars are going to town with tapping, and then towards the middle the song kind of takes a bit of a dark turn as the clean guitars come back and the keyboards working to build up the tension before the following solo comes in, and it's a beautiful one. And then we get a more epic solo towards the end, as this song kind of felt like this could fit into like a superhero film, like a Marvel or DC film. Now we get to the middle of the track of the album, Sleeping Giant, which has a rather mysterious, creepy beginning here with the riff, and then it gets into 3/4 time signature as the drums and the riff kind of go along with that to showcase the progressive prowess that Dream Theater is known for. It eventually does get more straightforward and even thrashy a little bit as the tempo picked up to thrash speeds for a moment as the drums are just going everywhere. And this will be the first track where we start to hear the symphonic elements coming along to help complement the eerie tension that's building in the song. Then we get a creepy, haunting solo here to add more to the mysterious nature of this track. And then the following solos afterwards, trading off with the keyboards, was really cool to kind of hear, like, who can play the shreddiest part? Is it Petrucci or is it Jordan Rudess? And yeah, that is often a criticism with Dream Theater, is that they tend to whack off on their instruments at times. Some cases it's true, other cases it's not. Here, it kind of was kind of them toying around with their instruments a little bit more like a competition, like who can shred more, Petrucci or Rudess. But it was cool that they would add something like that on top of the music. And then we get more solos that go from feel to shred. I will say, however, in terms of the song structure and the way the parts are put together, this was the most straightforward song of the album. Like, it felt more like a standard songwriting structure, even though they kind of extended those sections out to fit the 10 minutes that this song had. So, not as proggy as the other tracks of the album, but it's still a really damn good track. Transcending Time, which was the shortest song of the album at just a little under 6.5 minutes. This is probably the most upbeat song of the album, as this one certainly reminded me of classic Rush. Like, we get a keyboard solo to lead into the vocals, more time changes during the chorus, before a quick, beautiful solo. And like I said, there are moments on this track that remind me of Rush, like kind of like Limelight and Spirit of the Radio, kind of, because of just how it just felt so upbeat for the most part. Another solo coming through, delivering more great combination of shred and feel, tasty acoustic guitars and piano moments coming in before the conclusion of the song. This was definitely a more cheerful song on the album, but now we get towards the end, we get Awaken the Master. Now this would be where we get the djenty guitar tone, that 8-string sound, which I've had my criticism of over the years that I feel like when people do the whole 8-string sound too much, it ruins it for me. Here, this was definitely one of those songs where they kind of went a bit overboard with it, but not like throughout the entire track. It was just peppered in there a little bit with some of the riffs. But yeah, like, definitely reminiscent of Meshuggah, with the riffs and the rhythms trading off with the keyboards to create some chaos. Gets a bit thrashy again at times, or in a moment, and even a quick blast beat before the piano comes in. Another beautiful melodic guitar solo coming in, followed by that genty tone again with a breakdown as the vocals start to come through. This song certainly also kind of reminded me a bit of Haken, a little bit. More tasty solos on the guitar before that genty riff comes back. More solos. This time this solo had more shred. And then another breakdown with some symphonic elements over top of the breakdown to bring the song to a close. But now to the title track, the near 21-minute finale, A View from the Top of the World. The opening of this track had more ambience to it, and then it's followed by a marching riff with the snare going off with symphonic elements over top to kind of build up the tension of the song. While this one had a little more of that genty guitars, it wasn't there too much. It was just peppered in there, only sparingly, not like Awaken the Master where it was used a little bit much. Here it was used sparingly, which I can appreciate when it's used sparingly, but not all throughout the track. After that build-up, we get groovy with a breakdown as the symphony continues to lush through the mix. Tempo picks up with another beautiful solo to add more melody before a heavy monster of a riff comes in, followed by the vocals. Perhaps this song, I would say, had the most memorable chorus throughout the entire album, as it was catchy as all hell. The bass, however, the bass had, like, you could hear the bass all throughout the album, but on this track in particular, you can hear John Myung just going to town on the bass, like delivering some thick bass lines all over the place on this track after the chorus was done, as the guitars kind of providing ambience in the background while the bass and the keyboards are driving the music as the vocals kind of carry the story a little bit. Another solo coming in while the bass just continues to punch you right in the scrotum. Another blast beat even shows up, as Mike Mangini really wanted to do some blast beats on this album on the last two tracks. And the blast beat coming in as that solo ends, and then after that, the song takes a somber turn as the acoustic guitars and clean guitars come back to kind of calm things down and set the mood for a more somber atmosphere. Even some violins to just make it sound even more depressing at times. Followed by a somber, dark guitar solo during this section. And after some big somber vocal moments, another solo comes in before it hits a dramatic stop. And then it picks up in heaviness and epicness with more shredding solos coming in, and we get another keyboard solo to follow before we get another breakdown to bring more somberness to the track. And then after that, it gets back to being upbeat and epic as it brings the song and album to a close. Ooh, that was a lot to take in for 7 songs at 70 minutes. Like, they were definitely pushing themselves on this one. So overall, as I said, there are little moments where it feels like the instruments do kind of whack off a little bit, and that was particularly within the track Sleeping Giant. But for the most part, there are some catchy riffs, some catchy choruses, memorable moments throughout this album. Really, the one problem I could really think of off the top of my head would be during Awaken the Master, the way that the genty guitars were kind of being a bit overused during that song kind of did drive me a little bit nuts, because I am not really a fan of genty guitars. I don't like the 8-string guitar sound. No. 7 strings are enough for me if you want to get thick in the heavy department, but like the 8-string, that's just kind of overkill in my opinion. No pun intended for the band or the song. But besides that, like, adding in like those symphonic elements at times throughout this album certainly kind of helped build more epic tension throughout the album on a couple of tracks. Of course, the musicianship is spot on. I mean, I'm never going to criticize Dream Theater for being, quote, bad musicians. They're amazing players. I mean, the way they play on this album, certainly, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is probably the best Dream Theater album since, like, Octavarium or something like that. I'll go as far back as that, because this album, despite the jinty guitars on Awaken the Master, the song itself was still really good. I thought this was a fantastic album. As far as a final score, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. This was an amazing prog metal album. I don't know if I would call it the best prog metal album of the year. I feel like Soen still holds that accolade for me. Well, then again, I haven't checked out the new Between the Buried and Me, but I'd say probably after I listen to that, considering how much people love that album, that might take the crown. But aside from that, this is a great album. I might actually pick this one up because this one was absolutely fantastic. I love the production. I mean, Andy Sneap doing the mixing and the mastering, you can tell that this sounded nice because I love Andy Sneap's production work. Some people don't like it. I don't understand why. But aside from that, yeah, 9 out of 10 for the new Dream Theater, A View from the Top of the World. What did you guys think of this album? Let me know in the comments below. As far as what I'll review next, probably either tomorrow or Tuesday, depending on when I can get the video out or get time to listen to it. The new Massacre album, because I've been looking forward to that one. But until then, horns high, and I will see you soon. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Hey, can you fix this for me, please? I sure can. Okay, let's see what we got to drink. Ah, fucking perfect. Ah, some good old Powerade. Delicious. No, not really. You know what I like to have every morning? A nice sandwich with some Clover Valley creamy peanut butter. But you know what else I want to do with this? I want to dip my balls in it! Let's see what we got in here. Damn it, we don't even have Spam in here! Whoa!